think Mr. Perfect's going to be in the Ultimate Warrior's corner today.
Welcome back to Wrestling Roundtable Radio. We are on blogtalkradio.com, simulcast on GoFi Live. If you're listening to us on iTunes or YouTube, it's way after the fact, and you got to get with the program. Listen to us live. The number to call is 347-857-4647 to ask some questions, share your thoughts on whatever you want to talk about with mixed martial arts and pro wrestling. Before we get to the panel, wanted to let you know some of the latest goings-on with Wrestling Roundtable. First up, the new version of our newsletter. I mentioned it last time, but I want to bring it up right at the top of the hour because the new version of our newsletter is available for signing up on WrestlingRoundtable.com. Essentially, all you have to do is send an email to WrestlingRoundtable@gmail.com with subscribe in the title, and you will be on the mailing list. So you will get all the news and some exclusive little tidbits from myself whenever we update the news, which was actually yesterday. We had a huge news update, tons of international results. You want to know what's going on, not just in America, but around the world with pro wrestling and mixed martial arts. You go anywhere else, you're getting a lot of bullshit, a lot of stuff that's going to get you to click a link and have no relevant fucking information. You're going to get like half the story and hearsay and bullshit. We're going to give you the straight-up truth and some exclusive stuff, too. So the news is at WrestlingRoundtable.com. Also, show number 57, which was the last show of Season 4, our finale, is online. It is complete. It features our talk on the Montreal Screwjob and the Submission Round 5 Q&A. We're going to be taping later this month for our season premiere for Season 5. And also wanted to remind you, because so many of you have done it in the past couple of weeks, it's been, I don't want to say overwhelming, but very surprising and great. But many of you have bought Wrestling Roundtable t-shirts to show your support, and that's wonderful. That's great. You go to a pro wrestling or mixed martial arts show, we encourage you to wear it and spread the word. I know that you do that all the time, Corey, over in Chicago, and you get a lot of people talking about it, don't you?
Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, I'd like to take the time now to send a shout-out to some new fans that have been emailing me recently about our show. Dennis F. in New Mexico and Simon in Germany, thank you very much for listening. And yes, Eric, I even have a Wrestling Roundtable flyer that you gave me. And what I did is I positioned it in my clear knapsack so that I'm essentially a walking billboard. And when I'm at wrestling shows, I do notice that people see this, and they take down the information for Blog Talk Radio and for the YouTube. And I've actually seen a few people going on the Internet on their phones and using their 4G and their 3G specifically to check out the Wrestling Roundtable.
Well, that's great. And thank you, Corey. That is why you're on the show, because you were pretty much our biggest fan, and you always supported the show and spread the word about the show, and now you're on the show. So that's Coriander Ake over in Chicago, one of our radio panelists. The other is from Baltimore, Maryland, and she's on right now. Amira Rahim, hello.
Hey, everybody.
All right. Also on the panel is Rodney LeConte. Hey, yo, Rod.
Hey, yo, how's everyone doing?
Did you like the intro with Mr. Perfect?
Yes, I did. I thought that was like great. You told me to listen for it, and I didn't disappoint.
I just love that line, and I knew you did, too, if you're repeating it 20 years later.
I know, right? It's great to actually know people who actually get the reference.
I guess we're a generation that grew up like that HBO series Dream On, just thinking in sound bites, and lots of those are going to stick in your head, but that's a particularly funny one I enjoyed. Rounding out the panel tonight is Will Effin Brooks. Hello, Will.
Hey.
We're going to get right down to business here at the top of the show. And remember, the number to call is 347-857-4647. I see you in the chat room. Don't just stay there. Get on the line and share your voice. Right now, though, we're going to speak on mixed martial arts and some of UFC's latest shitty shows. Well, we'll see how shitty it actually might be in the details, but I think we're going to start with the lesser show definitely right off the bat, and that would be what really is their second Fox show, but the first official one on their deal, which was January 28th from Chicago's United Center. And that Saturday night was a triple header. And unfortunately, the most exciting debate of the night was who between Charles Sonnen and Michael Bisping was pressing the other against the cage the most. It's like we said last time, Rodney, how that UFC on FX show was so good, and in my eyes still was the best representative of the sport of UFC, because you got different weight classes, a great variety of those, great variety of finishes, and they were all exciting fights. Even the one that went the distance, the bantamweight fight with Eastman, that was a really good fight. All of these fights went the distance, and not really much happened. In fact, so little happened in Damian Maia's fight, I wasn't even going to mention it, but the middleweight bout with Charles Sonnen and Michael Bisping, of course, wasn't the original fight. It was Mark Munoz who was going to fight Sonnen. With the winner gets Anderson Silva. He gets hurt in training. They insert Bisping in there. And frankly, going into this, I thought it was going to be an easy win for Charles Sonnen. He looked so good against Brian Stann. And, of course, the fight before that, before all the drugs and legal problems and all that other shit, he looked really good against really, I guess, honestly, less than 100% Anderson Silva, but we didn't know that going in. He still looked great and came within an inch of beating Anderson Silva. He was like a minute and a half away or whatever. So he has made Anderson Silva look the most human he has since, I guess, he lost in Pride, and that was years ago. So Sonnen, I thought, was going to make easy work out of Bisping. Bisping never seemed like a guy that was going to be in the upper echelon, as I've said on the show before, of the middleweight division, but yet he had trouble with him. Now, the problem is the scoring, in a sense, because even though it was a unanimous decision for Charles Sonnen, and I scored it for him myself, everyone else seems to think that Bisping won the first two rounds. Now, the second round, I think, is no doubt Bisping. Third round, obviously Sonnen. He took him down and controlled him. But the first round, that's where the iffy factor comes in, because I think when Joe Rogan started spouting off about how horrible he was doing and how terrible he looked, I was like, what the fuck is he watching? I did not see that at all. I think that he controlled most of that, but that's the round that seems to be in question. So what's your score? What do you think about Sonnen and Bisping? How'd it go?
Just had a different view than you going into it. I thought that this could be a pretty even fight, because Bisping has done really good against wrestlers.
Not Dan Henderson.
Not Dan Henderson, right? But, I mean, he was even able to take Rashad Evans down in their fight. He did really good against Matt Hamill in their fight at 205. And he trains with a lot of good wrestlers, too. I know in the Wolf Slayer, they bring in a lot of Middle Eastern and European wrestlers to train with. So I knew that his grappling was there, and that Charles Sonnen wasn't going to have as easy time as he did with Brian Stann. But I was surprised on how much that Bisping was able to control the grappling situation. I thought that's something that Charles Sonnen, I think, needs to work on as far as the Greco-Roman and clinch part of MMA. So as far as the scoring is, I would definitely have given the first round to Charles Sonnen. It was no longer than 20 seconds before he knee taps Michael Bisping and put him on his knees and started wailing away. Maybe he wasn't as dominant as people thought. This was a little more even than people thought, especially in the grappling department. But, yeah, I mean, I just can't see how people could say Bisping won the fight. Yeah, he did good. Yeah, it was pretty close, but I would definitely give the edge to Charles Sonnen. I don't think he looked terrible. I just think that he just didn't expect Bisping to be that strong in that department, and it threw him off his game.
Mm-hmm. Caligula Ravishing in our chat room says, Eric, you are on Chal's channel. No, I'm not. See, that's the thing. Going into this, I was really hoping he'd lose because I'm not a Charles Sonnen fan, and it's not even for his stupid wrestling promos. I think he's a dick when he goes into press conferences and says, anybody can be a middleweight champion beating math teachers. I was like, well, what the fuck did Rich Franklin ever do to you? I thought that was pretty uncalled for. But I know, Amira, you're a Charles Sonnen fan, And it seemed, at least that night, that, at least going back and forth, I think on Twitter, you and I were the only ones that seemed to think Chal won in the first round. But how do you think in retrospect now?
I mean, I pretty much feel the same way I did at the time. It was kind of an interesting fight in that it didn't go the way that I think a lot of people thought it would. I think a lot of people thought every round was going to look like that third round. Mm-hmm. But it was close, but when it went to decision, I really didn't have any doubt that Chael won this. I think the fact that Joe Rogan was harping on Bisping holding him against the cage kind of affected people's opinions on this. But, I mean, whether you think it should be this way or not, takedowns count for more than pretty much anything in MMA judging that doesn't actually stop the fight. He was able to take him down each round, and it doesn't necessarily matter that in that first round he wasn't able to do anything with it, because that's the reason people will go for takedowns with like 30 seconds left. It scores a ton of points no matter what. We haven't really seen anybody else try to hold Chael up against the cage like that, and in that sense, Bisping did have something of a positional advantage through a lot of it, but he didn't really do too much with it. He kind of just held him there, and that's never gonna get you more points in MMA than getting a takedown. So I wasn't surprised with that decision at all.
Well, I guess Charles Sonnen was, because I think he was even saying afterwards that he thought he lost the fight. What'd you think, Will Brooks?
I had Charles Sonnen winning, but again, it was close. I mean, one or two punches here or there, Bisping could have easily just as won, but I had Charles Sonnen winning the whole time, and I know you're not a fan, but you know what, though? I kind of like the fact that he's a pro wrestler being in mixed martial arts, and I kind of like the fact that he's a dick, because it makes me want to boo him, just like a good heel does, just like the Diaz brothers. They're assholes, but I will still pay to see them fight, because you want to see them get their comeuppance. I'll still pay to see the next Charles Sonnen fight, and hopefully it's against Silva, a healthy Silva who can kick the shit out of him. But we'll see.
It will be in June in Brazil.
Well, I can't wait.
A lot of people could wait for the next Rashad Evans fight, because he is like the master of lay and pray to a degree, and this didn't really even get that far. It was in the light heavyweight division and ended up with a 50-45 score, and that's exactly how my scorecard at home went. Rashad Evans in essentially a number one contenders fight against Phil Davis. Phil Davis undefeated up until this fight, and boy, he did nothing to really stop that from happening, his first loss. And Rashad Evans capped off an evening. It's funny, as I was alluding to before with the FX show, right, Rod? So they burst out onto Fox this past November with JDS and Velasquez, and it's this big hyped fight, heavyweight title, going to be great, lasts a minute. And everyone and their mother going into it, forget fucking hindsight is 20/20. Even going into it, Amira, I think we were all like, what about our Ben Henderson-Clay Guida fight? Why are they putting all their eggs in one basket for a 1 hour broadcast when that's not exactly what they usually do? So that's what happened, and I guess this next time around, the first official show, no, it's going to be triple header, and if we have time, we'll show some prelims, which didn't happen because all the fights went the distance, but it's like both extremes, which were bad. They need to find that Goldilocks zone that's right in the middle, not too hot, not too cold, but just right. And that's why I'm a little more forgiving of UFC than I am to WWE or pro wrestling, because you can go into a show or an event and have everything lined up perfectly and all the hype and you've got everything set, but you can't control what happens in the cage. Whereas pro wrestling, I'm not as forgiving because they are in control for the most part. I mean, sure, there are times when there's guys in the back and people are going over their time cues or over the time allotted or whatever, so it's not like 100%, but still to the point that pro wrestling is scripted, so it's booked to be a certain way. They should be in control of all that. Whereas the X factor in MMA is it's not scripted, so you can't be in control of everything. So unfortunately, the way it's ended up on Fox so far, I don't think it's created a great impression so far. And of course, it's only 2 shows in to a 7-year deal, whatever, with Fox. So we've got a long way to go, and hopefully it'll get better. And hopefully that starts with Izod in May with the Jim Miller fight against Nate Diaz. But this and the first show weren't very good. And again, I think the FX show was a much better representative of the sport. As it was, Rashad Evans, Phil Davis, capping off a really boring event What'd you think, Amira?
Well, to speak to what you just said, I don't have as much criticism for them about how this show turned out than the first one, because I think this show actually looked a lot better on paper than it turned out. Like, I would not have thought this show was gonna go the way it did. So,
sure.
I
think everyone going in thought it was going to be good, but that's not how it turned out.
Yeah, no, definitely not. But I see what they were thinking with this one. Davis is a really good fighter. He really is, but he's not at this level. And this was just such a step up in competition for him. It was just Rashad taking him down all day long off of catching his kicks and then holding him down. I mean, there was some striking in the last round, but overall, yeah, this was pretty dull. But if it does do one thing, at least it set up the much more promotable fight for them, which is Evans versus Jones. So
right.
At least they got that out of it.
Yeah, I got to agree with Amira on this one. I think Phil Davis has a lot of potential, but this is a little too much too soon. I mean, yeah, he was undefeated, looking great, but he wasn't ready for Rashad Evans. Rashad Evans is a better version of what Phil Davis is trying to be. I got to feel bad for UFC. Two shows on Fox, and both of them have been disappointing. Mm-hmm. I mean, nothing against Cael Velasquez, JDS, but I don't think they planned for a knockout 60 seconds into the fight. And this one, I don't think they plan on having three boring fights that went the distance and just no real excitement in any of them. So I'm kind of thinking Fox is starting to look at this deal like, what the hell did we get ourselves into?
Don't you think it's a little too early to say that? Again, we're only 2 shows into a long-term relationship.
So far, it hasn't looked that good. I mean, I'm not saying I haven't enjoyed it. I've been loving it because it's free TV to watch the UFC. I love it. But I'm afraid that Fox is going to look at this like, what the hell, man? We have not seen a good fight yet. So,
for any pro wrestling fans who might be listening, don't get the impression that going the distance means it's a boring fight. Absolutely not. In fact, pretty much, at least in my opinion, all the best fights in the past several years, like Fight of the Year or whatever, have gone the distance. In fact, whether it's Edgar and Maynard 2 or Ben Henderson and Anthony Pettis in WEC, Nogueira and Couture, or even the recent Hua-Henderson fight, Dan Henderson-Hua. All those were great fights, and they all went the distance. So it's not necessarily to mean that just because it goes the distance and doesn't have a definitive finish means that it was a boring fight. Rod?
I just don't know what people really expected out of this fight. I mean, with Rashad Evans, it really depends on his opponent. If they're just willing to engage, or if they're willing to, or if they can stuff his takedowns. Phil Davis, I think the one big curiosity factor is, can he take Rashad Evans down? And he couldn't, and that really messed him up the whole fight. He had a lot of trouble even taking Little Nog down in their fight until he started going for those single legs. And I don't think he was really going for the same takedowns against Rashad. It just really proved that collegiate wrestling and MMA wrestling are really 2 different skills, and you really just have to make that adjustment. And over time, Phil Davis would make that adjustment. As far as UFC on Fox goes, I think, well, it's just ridiculous to think that Fox is going to think what they got themselves into after I'm sure that the Diaz Condit fight did really good on pay-per-view numbers. And the people in the audience for the Fox shows watching on Fox, I'm sure there's not an audience who's just watching UFC on Fox. I mean, there's so much programming out there with the pay-per-views. I think that this year in pay-per-views is going to be one of the strongest yet, with Jones-Evans coming up, the rematch with Dominic Cruz and Uriah Faber, then you have the rematch with Anderson Silva and Chael Sonnen. You just have a lot of great potential matchups, and plus GSP coming back at the end of the year. So this is going to be a monster year for UFC. The first show, it's a heavyweight title fight. I mean, you really can't predict what's going to happen, if it's going to go 90 seconds or... I mean, they probably knew it wasn't going to go the distance. I really can't fault them. It's out of their hands, and all they could do is ask the fighters to fight. I mean, not every game on Football Sunday is the most exciting game ever, but people still going to tune in the next Sunday to watch. Not every Giants game is the most exciting game ever. Regardless, if you really stop watching UFC because you were disappointed that it wasn't Forrest Griffin, Stephen Bonner, change the channel then. That's really pretty much all I can tell you. These guys go out and they fight. I still think it's going to be a great year for UFC.
I wasn't saying I'm going to stop watching. All I'm saying is that the casual guy who's like, oh, what's UFC stuff? Let me check this stuff out. And he turns on Fox because it's free and he sees these fights. He's not going to be as impressed as he would say he gets on the pay-per-view and watches a fight. That's what I'm trying to say, that as many fans as they could be gaining with this stuff, then I feel as though they're not doing it. I mean, that's not UFC's fault. Again, once the bell rings, it's in the hands of the fighters. And if they don't put on a good fight, or if they put on a fight like Bisping Chael Sonnen, which was really just a big grinder of a fight, I mean, I'm sorry, a lot of guys are gonna be like, this sucks, and just change the channel. Me, I'm gonna watch every second of it because I love it. All I'm saying is as many fans as they could have gained with this stuff, I feel like they're not doing that. Now, again, that's not the UFC's fault. It's the fighters' fault. And even then, it's not really their fault. They got to fight their game plan because they got to win. So it's really just, I think they haven't put their best foot forward as of yet. I mean, they've been trying to. I just don't feel as though it's been there yet.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't had their big fights, and I agree with you guys saying that it was a mistake not putting Ben Henderson and Clay Guida on the first Fox show. But I think they'll eventually get there with finally having a really solid Fox card, because last half of last year, all their cards were really solid for that, just to get on the Fox show on the network. I think, it'll just take time. Not everything's the Cinderella story for UFC. They worked hard. I think they'll get there, and the casual fan, the Fox fan at least, will hopefully be in tune for that one Fox card that gets people talking.
They'll get there because, I mean, it's emphasized to all the fighters to have exciting fights anyway. That's what stand-ups were invented for. And it's not like they don't know the scale of what this deal is going on Fox, FX, Fuel, whatever the hell it might be. So they'll get there. And what you were saying about pay-per-view, Rod, I mean, they did take a big dip last year after the Toronto show with GSP, and they did move the pay-per-view time back, supposedly because of that. And they did lose Brock Lesnar, but yeah, GSP is going to be out for at least until the summer, so that sucks for them. But if you're an MMA fan, the cards have been generally great. And like I said, there are some stinkers here and there, like maybe this Fox show, but for the most part, they have a good batting average, so I'm sure they'll get better. And if nothing else, the ratings for the Fox shows have been very good. So
yeah, I think, and even I forgot to mention the heavyweight title fight. I just think that these pay-per-view numbers, the pay-per-view numbers are just going to be a lot better than they were last year. I think we have a lot more exciting fights to look forward to than we did last year. The UFC could just only do what their fighters are able to do.
Well, then we move on to this past Saturday, February 4th, because UFC 143 emanated from Las Vegas, Nevada's Mandalay Bay, and of course this was supposed to be GSP's big return fight. I mean, when he ducked out of this fight, well, not ducked out of it, but he had to pull out of this fight because of his leg injury, I remember thinking how pissed they must be because they must have lost out on a big payday here. If you saw how many ways they made this show available to purchase, streaming on the internet, through YouTube, Ustream, Yahoo, 3D pay-per-view, Android apps, and all this other stuff. And clearly, when they're going to be showing a fight in 3D in theaters, you know when GSP had to pull out of the fight, they're like, fuck, who's going to pay to see Carlos Condit in 3D? And that's no reflection of his talent whatsoever, of course, but just the idea of star power and everything. And, of course, the Diaz fight was the dream money fight and everything. But as it was still interesting and intriguing. However, before we get to that, I did see this show in 3D in the theater, and like an idiot, I forgot my glasses because I have glasses for distance. I use it only when I'm like driving to see signs that I'm unfamiliar with, or when I'm watching TV or a movie or anything. So that was goofy on my part. But the feed was also fucked up color-wise. It looked like everyone was painted red or so. But it's an interesting idea. I'd give it a second chance. I think the potential's there, but they're still in the experimental phase. And if nothing else, I thought even if they lost out on GSP and who knows what sort of money with that, if nothing else, this will at least give them sort of a dry run, Rod, because you know about the whole Xbox Live, and this was also streamed on Xbox Live. You know the Xbox Live fiasco with the Brock fight with Overeem in December?
Yeah, how it didn't go through, right?
Not only that, it looked like it happened on YouTube, too. People paid for it, and we're seeing buffering and shit. So It's better if they can at least get their shit down on a fight with Carlos Condit, so that way when GSP does come back, they can at least be better on the ball about it and not have shit crash on Xbox and to give refunds or whatever. So there was some light at the end of the tunnel there. But before we get to the main event, we go to the welterweight division. Sticking with welterweights, Mike Pierce lost to Josh Koscheck, and lots of controversy about this, more so, I would say, than the Sun and Bisping fight. However, I myself scored it for Josh Koscheck, and at least one or two judges agreed with me because it was a split decision. Josh Koscheck, I gave him the first round only by a hair. It was really so close, but I made the choice for Koscheck, and that's what ended up really swaying the whole fight. So how'd it go when you were watching it, Rod?
Yeah, I think I scored the same way too. The first round, I think, was really close. Josh Koscheck's experience won him the fight. I think he was able just to control the cage more. I think he was better on the stand-up. Did a good job of not letting Mike Pierce have his way in the wrestling department. It was by hair, but yeah, I do think Josh Koscheck won the fight, and Mike Pierce should feel like a loser because I think even though he lost, he wasn't stopped, and I think his stock went up.
Koscheck may have won by a hair, but it was a bleached blonde hair, I guess. Will Brooks, I think you disagree with us.
Not by a lot. I mean, I had Mike Pierce winning only because I felt he controlled the match a little bit more than Koscheck did. But like they always say, never leave it in the hands of the judges. That's what Mike Pierce did, and he lost. Now, I mean, I had Koscheck winning was not a humongous shock to me. I just thought Pierce did a little bit more and controlled the fight a little bit better. But Koscheck winning wasn't a huge like a pissed off kind of moment like Matt Hamill losing to Bisping was. It's just one of those that sucks kind of moments.
Mm-hmm. Kind of felt the same way Will did. I also thought Pierce just barely edged that first round. I thought he looked really, really good at the beginning of it and was able to definitely outclinch him. It was super, super close, though. Just the whole fight was a ton of battling for position, and the striking was pretty even. Looking at the judging, honestly, it was probably that last takedown in the third that won it for Koscheck. But, yeah, like he said, not one where it was a robbery or anything, just incredibly close. I would have just slightly given it to Pierce.
The second fight that we were going to cover was in the heavyweight division. This was not a split decision. This, like the main event, went to a unanimous decision. However, I don't think that people were arguing about Verdum getting the nod over Roy Nelson like they were about the main event. And frankly, going into this, I was really rooting for Roy Nelson, not just because I do like Roy Nelson, but because after that fight that Verdum had in Strikeforce in the heavyweight Grand Prix against Overeem last year, I had such a bad taste in my mouth. That fight sucked so bad, and it was pretty much all him. And especially now that I think about it, seeing as how good he looked in this fight, you'd think why wouldn't he try and stand with Overeem? Now, I know, of course, Overeem's K1 winner, great kickboxer and everything, but fucking Lesnar even tried standing with him for a couple minutes. Why didn't Verdum? But as it was, I think Verdum redeemed himself in my eyes because he really looked so good. Very crisp, nailed a lot of his knees and strikes and looked very good. Roy Nelson, as Dana White has said numerous times after the fact, has the best chin in MMA. He did not go down. He also went the distance with current heavyweight champion Junior Dos Santos, so that's a testament to his toughness. But as it was, Fabricio Verdum, this BJJ world champion, didn't really go to the ground at all. He just looked awesome standing up, and he got the nod. So now the rumor is that he's down for facing Frank Mir in June in Brazil or whatever, but we'll see about that, see if it comes about. As it was, your analysis of his performance, Will Brooks, Verdum, and Big Country.
Yeah, I was rooting for Big Country the whole time, and he's getting in better shape. It's funny, the smaller his stomach gets, the bigger his mullet gets. But honestly, you couldn't really make a case for him in this fight. He was getting outclassed standing-wise. Verdum just had control of the whole fight. I feel bad. It's kind of sad though when you see a guy picking on the fat kid, but I don't know. I had Verdum win this whole fight. There's no argument against it. He won.
I should point out that the 3D broadcast had a separate announced team of John Anik and Kenny Florian, and they also called the FX show, I believe. They're okay. My problem is I just can't tell who the fuck they are. I can't distinguish between them when they're talking. I was really missing Goldberg and Rogan in the theater. But I'm just so pissed at John Anik because he's Well, he didn't steal it because I doubt he read it, but he called Roy Nelson Kung Fu Panda. That was my joke, goddammit. I said it on Twitter like last week. But all the same, Rod, what's your thoughts on this heavyweight bout?
I thought it was a really good bout, a really exciting fight to watch. I was excited for this match just in case they went to the ground. People underestimate Nelson's jiu-jitsu, and I really was interested to see how this will play out if this turned into a grappling match. But for Doom, he came out like twice the man he was in the striking department than his last fight against Overeem. This was really good, throwing like a lot of knees and really working that clinch and throwing like spinning heel kicks, and he looked like a different fighter. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what this guy could do in the heavyweight division now. It seems like he did redeem himself after that fight, and looks like the same guy that was stopping Brandon Vera and Gabe Gonzaga before the JDS train ran all over him.
Yeah, Verdum just ran over Nelson here. His Muay Thai was on point in this fight, and I mean, if Nelson wasn't so hard to finish, I think we probably would have seen that off some of those knees that he took early on. Especially that one that like bent his nose sideways and opened up that cut. There was some great knees in this. Verdum looked so good. I mean, it's probably someone that we're going to see in the mix now in the heavyweight title scene with what's going on with that. I could see that as a name that's probably in there now after this fight. Such a dominant win.
I always find it really weird because the first time I ever saw Big Country fight, he got knocked out by Andrei Arlovski, and now I'm seeing him take all these hard shots to the face and he's not going down. So I got to believe, what the hell happened with that Andrei Arlovski fight? He looked like shit.
The deal with the Arlovski fight, which was in Elite XC, I believe, apparently he took the fight on very short notice, and I guess he didn't have time to. I don't want to say 10 days, but that's the number that comes to mind. And I really thought it was bullshit, that stand-up in that fight, because he's a jiu-jitsu practitioner. He was working on the ground. They stood him up, and he ended up taking a shot. So I guess it was just an off night for Big Country. I couldn't see that happening now, that's for sure.
Verdum, I'm sorry, I have to disagree. I don't think Verdum is good enough to get to the top echelon of heavyweights. Not saying he's bad. He'll be fine, but he won't. I don't think he'll step up to that top. Like the top 5, 6 guys in the division. But that's just how I feel. I think once he faces his next fight, it's going to be against a bigger name, and he'll probably get his ass kicked. But, I mean, that's just me, though.
Well, we'll see. And what's funny is during the 3D broadcast, Anik was explaining constantly how Joe Silva, the booker or matchmaker for UFC, was so impressed with Verdum's performances outside UFC that he brought him back into the fold. And I don't know. The last time I saw him was that fucking horrible Overeem fight, and I was like, really? I don't get it. And now that he's saying he wants to face Mir, I think that's kind of a step down for Mir because, frankly, I think Mir, if this Velasquez-Bigfoot Silva fight is not going to happen, and it looks like it's not, I think Mir, whoever he fights next, and I think it should be Velasquez, should be in line for a title shot if he wins because he's won several of his last fights in a row, and they were against some big names, and they were decisive. Mir's looking pretty good lately, so I think he should be head of the gate instead of Verdum, but I don't know where that came from anyway.
Mir wouldn't last, I'm calling right now, Mir would not last 3 minutes with Cain Velasquez.
Okay, well, let's see if that happens. In the main event, it was to crown the interim welterweight champion. It was Carlos Condit and Nick Diaz, and of course the cute part about it was the last WEC welterweight champion versus the last Strikeforce welterweight champion. Well, of course, there could be another Strikeforce welterweight champion, we'll see. And they're going to fight for a UFC title. Now, there was still controversy about the scoring. I gave it 49-46 Carlos Condit because I only gave Nick Diaz the first round, actually. Dana White said he thought he won the first 2. That's not how I scored it. And Nick Diaz and his supporters were saying that Condit was running the whole time. Well, if you just switch the places of where Diaz was standing and Condit was standing, there's no dispute then. What good is it if you're in the center of the octagon and, yeah, you're controlling the center and whatever, pushing forward, but Condit was throwing more strikes and landing more strikes, and I never thought I'd see the day where Nick Diaz was outclassed, at least until maybe he fought GSP, but that's what happened. I did not expect it to go this way at all, and that's just how I scored it. Carlos figured out a way to beat Nick Diaz, and that's all there was to it. And Nick Diaz's response to it was, wah.
I would have gave the first round, the fifth round. I'm not going to complain. I did think that Condit landed more strikes, even though he was less aggressive than Diaz. I thought he was landing more significant strikes. Maybe Diaz might have thrown more, but I think Condit was definitely more accurate with his strikes. I could see 3 rounds going to Diaz. I forget whether it was like the second or third one that I thought was like really close, and I was just really happy that I wasn't in one of the judges' seats. Good fight, really good fight. I think it delivered on all counts. I think everyone was just excited that for the first time in almost 4 years, there's going to be a new welterweight champion, and just kind of shake things up in the division for a little bit and give new guys a chance. But it looks like it's going to be Condit versus GSP and nobody in between. It was almost as expected. I thought maybe Condit would have been a little bit more aggressive, but he played his part and he did it well, and now he has gold around his waist. But as far as the Nick Diaz quitting MMA thing, I really don't think that will last.
Mm-hmm. Dana White said that he'd be open to a rematch, I believe, between the two. Let's see what happens if Nick Diaz settles down and doesn't become a triathlete or boxer or whatever instead. I don't need this shit. Will Brooks, what do you think of that fight?
I think you're insane, Rodney. How did you have Diaz winning the first round? Eric, I know you said the same thing. The first 2 rounds, Diaz didn't do shit. All he did was put his arms to the side and say, dude, you going to fight me or what? And Condit just kept going in and out and in and out and in and out, just frustrating the living crap out of Diaz the whole time.
In his first or second round, he got more shots than.
It's definitely not what I saw. I was watching the whole fight. I was glued to this TV, and I didn't. First 2 rounds, I saw Diaz do nothing but put his arms to his side and bitch. And then by the time the third round came out, he kind of realized, wow, I'm losing this fight, and still couldn't do anything until like the last minute where he finally took Condit down. And I thought he was going to submit him. I thought he was going to win, but Condit didn't give him anything. But no, I mean, yeah, like I think it was just smart game plan. He just went in and out like an old school boxer would do, and that's how he frustrated the crap out of him. By the time Diaz tried to figure it out, it was way too late. He was down on a lot of points, so he couldn't do anything. Now, if you wanted to get the last round to Diaz because he got the takedown and controlled the last bit of the fight, that's fine. But I mean, I pretty much had it a unanimous decision as well. I really didn't see Diaz do anything until the end of it. Then all of a sudden he complains and wants to run away because he's a little bitch. I mean, listen, you lose, that's one thing, man. Don't have to run away. Just come back tomorrow and train harder. Whatever. He'll be back.
Yeah, Condit's game plan was fantastic here. Like, he was just able to create a situation where Diaz couldn't do what he usually does to people. I heard a lot of that, too, about people saying it was running away, and even some just ridiculous stuff with people comparing it to that awful Caleb Starnes-Nate Corey fight, that's ridiculous. But God. the thing is, I realize that people like to see 2 guys just like slugging it out in the ring, but that's not the goal in striking. Whatever type of striking you do, whether it's boxing, whether it's Muay Thai, at the end of the day, the goal is to hit the other person and not get hit yourself. And that's what Condit did for a lot of that fight. I give him a ton of credit, too, for being one of the few people to not fall into the trap that Diaz always gets people in with talking shit in the middle of the fight and getting people to run in and throw just sloppy shit that they get caught on. Condit wasn't having that, and yeah, I thought he won. I might have thought it was a little closer than some of you guys did, but definitely scored it for Condit. Like, I have no idea what people were talking about with Diaz got robbed in this. Absolutely not.
I don't either, but that's what happens when close fights go to decision, I guess. People fall on different sides of the fence, and we'll see if that happens in the main event of 144 in Japan, Rod. Jersey boy Frankie Edgar defends the lightweight title against Ben Henderson, and just really that whole card is going to be sick. Any thoughts on that?
I'm very excited, and yeah, I'm a Jersey boy. I've met Frankie twice. Good guy, but
and I'm rooting against him. I'd have no qualms.
But I am going with Benson Henderson to win the title.
Right now, though, we're going to move on to pro wrestling. Thank you, Amira, for your MMA thoughts. And before we get to the nitty-gritty of pro wrestling, because got a lot of stuff to cover, I actually want to touch on the Montreal Screwjob show we did, follow up on that a little bit. But first, I want to go to some calls after some poll results, because there are new polls right now on WrestlingRoundtable.com. However, The poll results from last time were, first up, who cuts the best promos in MMA? 0%. None. No votes. Went to Fedor Emelianenko. Ha! Come on, you people vote for Hornswoggle. You always vote for the goofy shit that I put in these polls just to throw you off. Not one for Fedor. Oh well. 5% went to not just Michael Bisping, but also Tank Abbott. Tank Abbott was my vote, by the way. 12% went to Rampage Jackson. I guess if it was who's the best humper in MMA, he might have been number one. But 17% went to second place. Two people, appropriately enough, tied together. Tito Ortiz and Dana White. Interesting bedfellows there. 44%, the overwhelming majority, went to your boy, Charles Sonnen.
Of course. Who else is going to win that?
The other poll, who's the funkiest? In light of Funkasaurus Rex tearing up Twitter and the WWE Universe, looking back on some of the dancing wrestlers of years past, 6% went to not just Alex Wright, but also to Dude Love. Between those two, I would give the nod to Alex Wright.
I know, that's right. What happened? It's number one.
Do you remember watching Nitro? And remember how we always talk about Nitro when we reminisce about it, how everyone was into the show? Like, it was just a fun show. People were into every match. And even this goofy German young heel, Alex Wright, comes out, and he does this dance, and they would cut to the crowd. Same for Disco, but they would cut to the crowd, and everyone's doing the dance. It was just like a Nitro party. It was just fun.
We used to do it in video class.
We should be doing it right now. 9%, moving up the chart, went to Rikishi. How many people do you think know that Rikishi is actually a sumo title, Rod?
Not many.
Well, I assume it was like a takeoff of his relative Yokozuna, which was a sumo title too, sumo grand champion in that case. But I just assumed that that's where the whole idea came from. Like, it was like a sumo type outfit anyway.
He didn't say Yokozuna right.
Yokozuna. Excuse me. When they induct him in the Hall of Fame this year, which seems inevitable, they should just get Donnie Wahlberg to introduce him.
Say better. That'd be great.
Moving up, 12% tied between Flash Funk, or Too Cold Scorpio if you prefer, and Mae Young's Twat, because that's got to be funky. Second place, 15%, kind of a cheat, but Too Cool, which is two people, also tied with Disco Inferno. I was shocked when the first numbers started coming in how Disco shot up there. But cool, I guess. And somehow, I don't know, it's just too new to me. The most votes, first place, 25% went to Funkasaurus Rex.
No idea who that is.
It's Fat Brodus Clay. He dances now. What they did was essentially they took Brodus Clay, who's King Hippo, and put him in Flash Funk's outfit and gave him the Funkettes and had him come out to Ernest the Cat Miller's WWF theme. That's essentially what they did.
Nobody voted for the oddities?
Well, maybe we'll do another poll to include them. No, we won't.
Or at least
anyway.
Public Enemy?
All right. There's lots of other funk in wrestling. Terry Funk. But anyway, polls right now on WrestlingRoundtable.com are: what old school UFC fighter would you want to see come back and fight for Zuffa one more time? And who would you want to guest, or be a guest panelist, on the roundtable the most? That's lots of choices for you right there. Very interesting. But before we go on to some more in pro wrestling, let's get to some calls. Ryan in Massachusetts. Been a long time. How have you been?
Doing pretty good. And as I've said before, I'm pretty much going on record as being the only Michael Bisping fan in America.
Once he got put into that fight, I became a Michael Bisping fan.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I understand why Bisping lost the fight. I still think he should have won the fight just because I really don't agree with the concept of takedowns that don't result in anything resulting in big points. I think that's just not in the spirit of the ruling. For the Diaz-Condit fight, I really felt like I was watching the MMA version of a Floyd Mayweather fight. I mean, I'm happy for Condit, and it's a great showing of his diversity in striking, but it was just it. I mean, I understand that you're not always going to get a slugfest, but it was a little sad personally to see the natural-born killer turn into a point fighter. Again, that's my own personal take on it, but still happy for him. Glad Diaz is being a little bitch, and if he does not retire, I still think he should, if anything, maybe give him a fight with Koscheck.
Ramon in Chicago, you're on.
Hey, Eric. I think I might be one of the few people who actually like the Evans-Davis-Fox show.
Why is that?
Yeah, I was actually really into Chael Sonnen and Michael Bisping in the main event. Maya and Wademan sucked, especially the third round. That was just embarrassing. But, yeah, I was actually really into the other two, and I thought that Rashad Evans really did try to finish the fight, but he just simply couldn't for whatever reason, you know.
Do you think maybe he was playing it safe to a degree because he's had so many setbacks injury-wise? This is like he finally gets the title shot against the light heavyweight champion after being in line for it like 3 times?
Well, yeah, actually, I think like maybe like the 5th round he was probably playing it safe. But I thought that early on he was actually trying to finish him, but like Phil Davis kept on escaping.
I do think that's probably true when he had him in the crucifix a couple times. I do think he was making an effort to finish there, but he got out of it. I actually thought there was one of the times I thought it was going to be over soon when he was doing that, but it was towards the end of the round. Yeah,
it really did look like Phil Davis, as much as he was flopping and trying, could not get out of that crucifix, and I guess he was saved by the bell. Aaron in Maryland, hello.
Hello, Eric. What's up, people in the roundtable? All right, I got 3 quick little things. Speaking of UFC, I think UFC 44, like you guys said, looks pretty sick. And I do think I agree with Ronnie. I think Ben Henderson may beat Frankie Edgar for the lightweight championship. But, however, I think that Frankie Edgar may possibly win here because, like his predecessor, who he beat the belt for in BJ Penn, held the title for over 2 years before Frankie Edgar won the title in 2010. So it really is a fight that could go up in the air and may be a potential fight of the year candidate as well.
Well, hopefully it's a fight of the year and we don't get another Frankie Edgar title rematch.
Yeah, indeed there, Rod. Another quick little thing to talk about is from a WWE standpoint that I know you guys are going to get to WWE later on, but that there is something that really have been ticking me off of been people who are automatically expecting Jericho to win the Royal Rumble. Because I think it was a great decision.
I'm one of them, so why are you pissed at me?
No, it was just something for people to say that Jericho was automatically going to face Punk anyways to win the Rumble. But
right.
However, like I said to people, that Jericho does not need to win the Rumble in order to face Punk. Because I thought it was a great swerve that they did at the end of the Rumble with Sheamus winning it, even though that was probably a setup because Triple H has Sheamus as one of his, muscle buddies, hint, hint. But I still think that Jericho would still have to face Punk anyway because they might have set up a program with him anyway. And I still think that what they're doing with Jericho and Punk on Raw is actually setting up to be a pretty good feud, possibly maybe heading into Mania, and looking to see what they do in the Elimination Chamber. And I hope that if Sheamus does pick the World Heavyweight Championship to face Daniel Bryan at WrestleMania, or if Daniel Bryan, at least I hope, keeps the belt until Mania, I hope that they do not get placed at the opener like the World Heavyweight Championship did last year with Edge and Alberto Del Rio, because that was really embarrassing. Because I know even though Edge won the belt because I know he wanted to have his grand conclusion as champion because of his neck injury, but I don't necessarily want Sheamus to go over, but At least something put it over big instead of like they did at WrestleMania 27, where it should have been Alberto Del Rio going over clearly because they messed with him big time.
I got a few things to say about that, I guess in response to the Jericho Sheamus thing, but we're going to cover the Royal Rumble in a little bit, so I guess I'll save it for that. But first up, I wanted to backtrack a little bit into time to 1997 because we just uploaded the Montreal Screwjob show where we discussed the long-awaited topic that I know a lot of people have been waiting for us to cover, and I think it's gotten a pretty great response, but even as I was cutting it together, I was like, man, there's so much more to say about it. And one thing I found very funny or perplexing or whatever, and I know I'll be the only one, that's the way it usually goes, but fucking fine. I thought it was very funny, especially coming from people who were Bret Hart fans, like we had on the panel, is I'm listening back to this, and I'm like, I can't believe people are justifying this, the screw job. I know things worked out, and they were able to make money off of it eventually with Mr. McMahon and all that other shit, and turning him into Austin's rival and riding the wave and whatnot. But at the same time, I still find it perplexing, not just that people are trying to justify what Vince McMahon did, because I think it's just wrong no matter what, in my opinion, but I actually was talking to Kevin Kelly about this yesterday, Rod, and one of the things I'm really curious about was why, because you agree with it too, and apparently I'm the only one who doesn't think so, but why was it so imperative in November 97 that we get Bret and Michaels on that pay-per-view? Because it seemed to me, after SummerSlam, when Michaels accidentally cost Undertaker the title, the next couple months, they segued into the main event themselves, Undertaker and Michaels. Bret Hart became practically an afterthought with the lame fucking mid-card, really, feud with the Patriot. He was the WWF champion and pretty much forgotten, not even main eventing the next two shows, incidentally.
Yeah.
And then they segued back into the Michaels rivalry that never really got off the ground again in 97 like they intended and tried a couple times. First, Michaels lost his smile. Then there was the hair-pulling backstage fight in the summer. They seemed to, like, bob in and out of interaction with each other without anything really on the horizon. And then when they did get back to it with Survivor Series, yeah, they did some international shows because the whole international U.S. versus Canada angle was Bret's a heel only in America. He's a face everywhere else in the world. Right. But just watching this unfold on American TV, I'm looking at two heels that are leaders of factions by this point and main eventing for the world title. It just seemed odd because I think a lot of Survivor Series was sold or promoted on the fact that we know these guys legit don't like each other, because in what other circumstance would they have two heels main event for the title? That wasn't like Austin's the special ref like at Judgment Day 98. Like there's not some outside factor or for a babyface to do something on camera. This was two heels wrestling for the title, and I thought it was very odd. So I remember you saying maybe when we were watching the Greatest Rivalries Blu-ray that they had to do Bret and Michaels because we never got the big rematch. Well, why?
Because this is something that's been brewing since WrestleMania 12. I think it's something that even in 96 that they were hinting when Bret came back. I think it was part of his heel turn because we kind of saw a foreshadowing of it after WrestleMania 12 when they showed him backstage and getting in his car and pushing the camera away.
Well, we know all along the plan was to do it at some point. It just seems so not only far gone at that point, like it just probably wasn't going to happen. Bret was on his way out. Michaels refused to job to him, and that's what really set up the whole screw job thing in the first place, because once Michaels said that, Bret was like, well, fuck this, I'm going to use my creative control and not do that specific finish on that specific show to this specific guy. So rather than get into that quagmire with Bret on the way out, don't you think it would have been better just to avoid it altogether?
Well, thinking about that, yeah. Back then, you didn't really know that it would amount to this. I mean, I remember watching it. By that point, yeah, I mean, the whole Michaels Undertaker thing started to push Bret to feud with Matt Patriot or whatever. But when the match was made, it's not something that made me roll my eyes. It was like, okay, all right, now we finally get this match that we were supposed to see at King of the Ring that never happened, and these guys has been, I don't know, working at least programs together where they're just cutting promos on each other, but nothing would really come out of it. And now we finally get to see this match at Survivor Series. Heel and heel is, I always thought it was strange. We've seen it with Brock and Big Show, even recently with Orton and Sheamus. I just remember that being a little odd. But it was in Canada, so Bret was playing the face in this match. You didn't know what was going to happen, so you can't say that you should have avoided it altogether. I think they could have come up with another scenario, maybe throw the Undertaker in there for a triple threat match. I thought that would have been better. Yeah,
Orlando mentioned that on the show, not for that specific night, but I thought that was a great idea. Shamrock was someone that Bret was kind of grooming in a way, or at least making motions that he wanted to work with him. Obviously, if you watch back the Raws, like the last Raw maybe, or one of the last few Raws that Bret was on, he's tapping out to Shamrock in some brawl, and then he got the title shot at In Your House the next month against Michaels. Shamrock did. So it seemed like he was at least in the mix. It could have been a four-way. It just seemed like there were so many different scenarios. But Caligula, ravishing in our chat room, says, Eric Bret could not have main evented Bad Blood. Well, I understand that, but I'm just pointing out that the WWF champion was relegated to out of the spotlight so much in those past couple months before the Survivor Series. But Will Brooks, one angle that we didn't tackle on the YouTube show that I thought I'd save for something more like this was the conspiracy angle, because that's where, and I've talked to so many wrestlers who believe this, that it was all work. And I've actually got a little more new information that I'd like to share about that, but let's hear your explanation. Why do you think it's work?
The more I think about it, the more it just makes a little bit more sense that he was going to go away for a couple of years and then come back for all the cool big return matches and the return this and all that stuff. And it just makes more sense that way to me. And also that...
Aren't you only saying that because it happened to work out for at least one party?
No, because had Owen Hart not had died, Bret Hart would have definitely came back in like 2 or 3 years. And think about the return matches he could have had.
That's ridiculous. That's the end game for the conspiracy angle for this. Well, Owen died, and that fucked it up. And I just don't think any of that.
No way. I really don't think so, because Bret did not want to go to WCW because he knew, even back in '96, he knew that WCW would not be able to do to the Hitman character what Vince McMahon could do. It just wasn't a fit on there, and why would he risk that? You know, if you're the hottest thing one night and then you go down to WCW and you cool off, why would anyone want to look forward to your return after 2 years of getting in the middle of, and that's when like Austin's hot and Triple H is hot, and it just would not fit. So we'll have Bret Michaels in '99.
Well, Rod. You're going to tell me right now that you wouldn't want to see the Bret Hart return to WWF after 2 years of being towed away in WCW? Dude, we were popping when he came back 13 years later. You kidding me? Come on.
That doesn't make it real, though.
Go.
But what would be the point? I don't know why they would want to do this. I mean,
because
after the last match, didn't they do that where he left for 6 months and then they're going to do that again, but this time for 2 years? I mean, why does it have to be, all right, well, after every Bret Michaels match, Bret's going to leave?
Well, because one thing, back in the territory days, guys would come into territory, make a lot of money, and then come back, and then leave, then come back to that territory later on for all the big return matches with all the new stars. This is what they were going to do, and plus, Bret Hart coming back 2 or 3 years later when Austin was the shit, and then The Rock was huge. Think about those matches, man. They would have been like the most incredible things we've ever seen.
Regardless,
fantasy booking doesn't make it real, though.
I just watched the Hitman Hart Wrestling with Shadows documentary again, and there's no way that this whole thing was set up.
Okay, well...
Yeah, because I always believe everything that I see on camera.
See, that's the problem. Wrestlers, and to a lesser extent wrestling fans, although it's getting closer and closer every day, are so used to thinking everything is fake that it's just becoming a pattern where nothing is real. They don't believe a thing. In fact, when Owen Hart did die, people in the arena, half of them were like laughing because they thought it was part of the show. People were so desensitized to that shit. So what I mean as far as burden of proof which is what I was about to say, is I'm a conspiracy theorist. Whether it's 9/11, JFK, any sort of political intrigue, I'm interested in that sort of shit. The one conspiracy angle I don't believe, the one conspiracy I don't believe is the moon landing, because that's the one that holds absolutely no water under scrutiny, and I think the burden of proof is on people who do think it's the work to prove it in a more concrete way other than it would have been cool. Logistically, it makes no sense. Here's some of that more information I found out, Will Brooks, that I thought was interesting. So, apparently, Vince McMahon would have people listen in on a phone call. Like, Vince Russo would be secretly listening in on a phone call people thought was private, and they're going over scenarios to Bret Hart that weekend, like that Saturday or whatever. And, of course, this is shot down. Oh, I don't want to do this. Bulldog and Neidhart suggested this. Oh, that sucks, or whatever the fuck. Whatever it wasn't working. And that's pretty much in line with the story. And that's another thing, Rod, actually, because people always point that out about Bret Hart. He's never changed the story. If it was a work, why still keep it a story now?
And why, after all this time away, the book, I mean, between the book, what he says in interviews, and the DVD, it's all the same. And right. You would think that at least
but
in
not just
book,
him, not even just him, outside accounts too. They all match up.
Exactly. I really don't think if this was a work that Bret would go through all this trouble to keep this a secret. I think with the amount of shit that's said in his book about like his family,
fucking girls in Israel.
Exactly. But he's going to keep that. He's going to keep the Montreal Screwjob a work. Get the hell out of here.
Rod, why the hell would Pete Rose to this day still say he's still never bet on baseball? Because it keeps him in the limelight. Bret Hart, I love Bret Hart. It wasn't the Montreal Screwjob, the most scrutinized thing that ever happened in wrestling. Would we still remember him as fondly? I would, but for the most fans, I'm not so sure.
But you just said it yourself, Will. It's the most scrutinized thing in wrestling. And you know that Jim Cornette joke, to get the news out, it's either telephone or tell a wrestler, because these guys have loose lips, and it's all fucking gossip. That's how these dirt sheets make their business. Guys call Meltzer and whoever the fuck who are in the office and like, hey, I got this scoop. And at least would have come up a hint of it. In fact, the only person that, when this has come up before, that people point me towards is, well, Canyon said when he went to WCW and asked, hey, Bret, is it a work? And Bret winked at him. First of all, if that story's even true, consider the source. This is a guy who claimed he got fired from WWF for being gay, and I'm sure Pat Patterson has a different opinion about that with his longevity. We know how long Pat Patterson lasted there for being gay. But I'm not even going to question any more of his credibility because he's dead, whatever. He can't defend himself. But point being, that's like the only person. I have proof that the screw job is not real and whatever. That's the only person, and I think it's a questionable source. But back to the burden of proof thing. So there's another conspiracy theory out there, but a different angle. The different conspiracy theory is that Vince let Bret go on purpose because him getting this big money deal would fuck up WCW. Not that Bret and McMahon were in collusion, that's another thing, but that this would cause such a disruption in WCW because the bean counters with the AOL merger would look at this and be like, what the fuck? In fact, that's kind of the slant they took on Confidential. Like, Bret Hart signing with WCW for $3 million a year killed WCW somehow, sure. Well, Here's a big problem with that. First of all, if you're going to let Bret Hart go, and of course the official story, so to speak, is that WWF wasn't doing financially too well. They signed him to that big contract. They had to let him go, right? Well, of all times to let Bret Hart go, not just when you've got intriguing storylines going on with USA, Canada, DX, Austin, whatever the fuck, but the competition is kicking fucking ass. They're about to have their biggest pay-per-view ever, which was Starrcade 97 with the big blow-off to Sting and Hogan. WCW's on fucking fire, kicking their ass every Monday night, and you want to give up your biggest name to go to the competition just on the hope that they'll fuck it up. Now, of course, the likelihood was good, but what did everyone keep saying to me about that? You can't take that risk during the Monday Night War. Well, that's kind of what the conspiracy says would have to have happened. And not just that, if it really was a conspiracy between Vince and Brett to come back at some point down the line or whatever. Not just the fact that they would have had to kept this to themselves to this day, they would have had to have kept it to themselves away from their family, because none of them have come forward and said anything about it. It did not come up during the Martha Hart trial, because the Montreal Screwjob did come up when she did sue the WWF in the wrongful death situation somehow, but not the fact that, like, hey, Owen told me or whatever the fuck. So he wouldn't have told his closest family, his friends. No one in Titan Towers knew. It would have literally had to have been just between Vince and Brett. And just the timing and the likelihood of that and the fact that nothing's come out since, I just don't think it holds any water.
We've been back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And I'm sorry, man. I'm going to stick to my guns. You're going to stick to yours. That's fine. No big deal. It's what makes being a wrestling fan so great. There's never really – we can argue all day long who's the best, who's the worst, who did this, who did that. But I will say this. One of the best things we ever got out of the Montreal Screwjob, I'm not talking about the McMahon character because that was awesome, but the McMahon's line of Brett screwed Brett is, to me, like the wrestling version of Bill Clinton's I did not have sexual relations with that woman. It's just one of those lines that just, to me, I remember the first time I heard it and thinking, are you out of your damn mind?
Or the fact that, like, 14 years later, we're still debating it.
Well, there are a couple other things I wanted to touch on, and then we'll move on. But one of the questions I asked, and everyone killed me for, was, supposing the scenario that really brought this on, everyone's like, Brett's going to show up on Nitro and drop the belt in the trash, and we can't let that happen, and they fucked him over because of it. Well, even if somehow, and it wouldn't have happened for like a month, keep in mind, Bret Hart couldn't have showed up until December 8th. That's the earliest Nitro he could have showed up. He didn't show up until a week after that, no less. So this is pretty much a little over a month after Survivor Series that Bret could have shown up. And suppose he did drop the belt in the trash or whatever. I still don't really think that it matters. And everyone killed me for it. Oh, no, it would have killed morale, and Vince never would have recovered, and they would always have that one-up and everything. But they were already planning on getting Mike Tyson. And that was the big thing, the new inductee in the Hall of Fame coming up this year, deservedly so for a change. And that's what really turned it around. So I think in the big picture, what matters more? The screw job in the little bubble of wrestling, or Mike Tyson, which was on the news? You know what I mean? I don't think by the time a year later things would have been any different. Things would have gone exactly the same.
It would have hurt his chances of coming back. And it really just for the fans who stood behind him for always, like, being loyal and doing the right thing regardless. I just think it would have just been very out of character for him to do if that happened.
Well, I understand that, and I agree, but I just mean to say that I don't think it would have really mattered in the long run as much as people say.
I completely disagree. You tell me in the middle of the biggest battle in wrestling history, the one guy who was the legit champion for another company goes on the other show with the belt, you can tell me that and throws it in the trash is not going to be like holy shit moment. That why would I? And at that point, I'm sorry. Yeah, you say Mike Tyson. Yeah, it got on the news. But at that point, they would have lost so many guys. People were like, dude, why am I going to watch that show? They just got.
See, that's where you lose me.
Yeah, I disagree with that.
I'm not saying it wouldn't be a big deal. Of course it'd be a big deal in the wrestling world, but it's not like WWF would have died in another month or two anyway. They would have coasted along and continued as they were. Austin was still hot. They still had DX. They still had Undertaker and their whole roster. I don't think it would have...
This was around the time when The Rock was starting to come into his own.
Fine, but I'm just saying that, yeah, it may have made them look bad to wrestling fans for a few weeks, but then everything would have just been back on track to the way it was. The key thing here is, I hate to keep going back to Mike Tyson, but that's really it. He's the one that brought them exposure. Austin is unaffected by this. Austin is in place, McMahon is in place, and Tyson is in place. And those were the three things that needed to happen a couple months later. And I don't think Bret, had he shown up on Nitro in any degree to trash the belt, would have affected that timeline regardless.
If he came on, all right, so great promo on McMahon and Michael's Survivor Series, stuff the belt in the trash, fine. People are fucking buzz. And then the Starrcade 97 happens, and people would have forgotten all about it.
Well, what about this? What about this scenario? What if Bret Hart goes on the Nitro with the belt and doesn't go in the trash and just walks around every night Nitro and Thunder with it? he has the belt and continually shows up every show with it, saying, "I'm still the fucking champion. I'm still the champ."
I don't think that legally could have happened.
Well, he would not go on the bench. If he covers up the WWF logo on it, he could do it.
Well, there might be a way or two around it. But point being, when WCW got Hall and Nash, too, it didn't die. I know it's the belt, it's a different scenario, but wrestling companies have weathered worse than that, like deaths and shit. I don't think it would have really swayed it too much. But one other point that I wanted to make about something Midge brought up is when I asked about whether the wrestlers should protest and band together for the day after, and maybe this could have been the only chance. Like Rodney made a great point with, if Undertaker, like the guy that everyone looks up to lead the locker room, had taken that step, maybe everything else would have fallen in line, their strength in numbers. And Bret was like, no, they shouldn't have done that because Bret's got a job no matter what. Bret Hart's well taken care of. It's not going to help him. Well, that's not the slant I was taking at it. It wasn't about getting Bret Hart a job back or whatever. It was about the fact that your boss just fucked over your most loyal guy. How can we trust you if you did that to your best guy? It should have just been, I think, more of a show of solidarity and support, I think. Back to the Blu-ray that we watched, Rod. What's funny about it in retrospect, with his whole comeback that Will Brooks alluded to, that he came back to WWE the other year and had a few appearances, main event at a fucking SummerSlam with the Nexus angle. I thought it was a really shitty run outside of that holy fuck time froze moment with Shawn Michaels. Of course, the match with McMahon is an infamous disaster at WrestleMania, but it seemed to me that Bret Hart, because he's been accused of this a lot, was just marking out for himself. He wanted to come back because he wanted to. It's like he'll say, well, of all the reasons he came back, this, that. And one of them was, plus I wanted to make sure the relationship was good for the kids, and he meant, like, the Hart Dynasty. And I was like, what the fuck? They already had a job when you got there. Didn't help them at all, really. It's not like he helped them get a huge push. And Teddy Hart would have been there years ago if he didn't fuck it up. So I think it was just more like, oh, Bret just wants to mark out for himself. Because you know what? I was always Bret Hart's biggest defender, but when he would be, like, at that Canadian luncheon where he flipped out on some journalist because he put a list of top Canadian wrestlers and Bret Hart wasn't, like, in the top 10, like, he was, like, ranked number 25 or some shit, and Bret Hart flipped out because he wasn't number one. I was like, oh, give me a fucking break. Maybe some of the shit that people were saying about it was kind of true. Oh, he always thinks he's the best and all this stuff. But you know what? Watching that interview that he did with Shawn Michaels talking about coming back and what it meant to him and how he wanted to bury the hatchet and get this weight off his back, it was really very touching. And it made me think twice about a lot of things and made me more sympathetic to him coming back to WWE because he put in so much work. And you know he's a perfectionist and he wants to get his craft down and took pride in his work. And it meant a lot to him. It was his life. He gave up being with his family and all that other stuff for it. Well, compensated for it too. But point being, he cared about his craft. And he didn't want to be known just as that, the guy who got screwed and whatever. So it meant something to him. And Michaels actually seemed pretty sincere. And, you know, I rip on Michaels whenever I can. And there were lots of people who were like, Michaels seemed like he was bullshitting and backtracking in that interview. I didn't really get that feeling. And it just seemed like a pretty good ending to me. So do you have any thoughts on the tearful ending to the Blu-ray, Rod?
I agree with you that his run was pretty shitty, even him beating the Miz for the U.S. title or whatever. And just seeing Bret Hart wrestling jean shorts is enough to make me almost regret him even coming back that January 4th show. You feel like it was 97 again because of pretty much, are you going to watch Bret or are you going to watch Hogan in the NWO? And it was the same, they were on at the same time, and I think that's what, just the whole Bret Hart packaging and everything like that was great. And I think the Blu-ray, I mean, after the shitty run and the whole Nexus thing, I think the Blu-ray kind of made up for all of that. I thought it was a good way to leave off with Bret Hart and everything he's done and everything. I thought it was great. I really didn't think, sure it was bullshitting too much. I thought it was kind of crap how sometimes you would say, well, I might have said that again. Like, I don't remember anything specifics. I mean,
come on, he was on a lot of drugs at the time. Give him the benefit.
He was, yeah, he was. But he was also apologetic for his actions. He admitted he was an asshole back then. He told Brett it was true. You know, he wasn't in the right state of mind. And I thought it was very truthful. I think it lined up right with Brett's book. I like how Jim Ross kind of, you pretty much almost forgot that he was there.
Yeah.
I thought it was a great DVD.
Yeah, it was. And if you want to get it, please get it through our Amazon shop. If you go to our shop, the online store portion on WrestlingRoundtable.com on the left, you can get anything on Amazon. So if you want to pick up that Blu-ray Greatest Rivalries, do it that way. But before we go on to the Royal Rumble with you, Will Brooks, let's go to a call. Jeremy in New York.
I will comment on that. It was a great show for the Montreal Screwjob.
Thank you.
I kind of see the angles of why people would think it was a work, especially the point you brought up when you talked about if the wrestlers actually stood up and went on strike. I mean, that would kind of really solidify that as, like, well, why would they do something like this? And it's kind of an interesting thought to think, what if that did happen? That could have actually ended the whole war between WCW and WWE, or F at the time, really. But that was around the time, too, where I wasn't really into wrestling. I had actually gotten into it back, and then I was only 8 years old at the time for WrestleMania 14. That's what really got me into wrestling again.
Well, you and tons of other people. That's kind of the point I was making. There were so many people who got back into it, maybe not specifically because of that show, although I would argue that, but around that time, yes. And it just really happened to work out. And it's funny because I think a lot of people are under the impression that it was like solely the screw job that started this Austin McMahon thing, and it really wasn't. I did point out on the show that they actually had Austin stun McMahon the first time, September 22nd in MSG, the first Madison Square Garden on Raw. The whole angle was Austin was building up through different tiers of the power structure. He stuns Lawler, he stuns Sergeant Slaughter, he stuns referees. Like, it's all building up to Vince McMahon, who we know is the owner by now. So it was going in that direction anyway. And what people, I think, really lose sight on, because I was at SummerSlam 97, Austin was super fucking hot, super over already. And of course, it would get much bigger later on, especially once the torch was passed from Shawn Michaels and the Attitude Era, or Austin Era, really started rolling. But Austin was like their top babyface at the time. So it wasn't completely out of nowhere. And especially with the spin that they put on it on TV, clearly McMahon was playing a heel character, and they just kind of lucked into that to a degree. It's like, all right, McMahon's the authority figure from September. We established that. And this just sort of gave him license to amplify that, I guess would be the right words. So, yeah. Anything else, Jeremy?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment real quick on a couple things. Really happy with the Royal Rumble. I actually watched it, and all the matches were pretty solid. I mean, I didn't really watch the Divas match. I wasn't really interested in that at all. I thought the Ziggler-Punk match was a very, very good match. Had a lot of good essence to it, and the Royal Rumble itself was pretty good. I didn't really like the fact that they put all the announcers in. But, and I gotta say, I really can't believe the comment that Booker T made when Karma got in. I think you guys all know what I'm talking about there. I'm really happy with Sheamus winning it. I really hope he goes to face Daniel Bryan, and I do hope that it does not end up being the first match on the card like last year. But
do you follow us on Twitter?
I do not have Twitter. No, I do not.
Well, you should sign up just to see the shit that flows like a stream of consciousness out of my head. Today I tweeted that Sheamus won the Royal Rumble for the privilege of wrestling in the mid-card at WrestleMania.
Nice.
Which is in all likelihood to happen.
Yeah. But, yeah, I'm definitely happy with that. There's talks of Money in the Bank coming back at WrestleMania, which they're going to push for former world champions, which I don't think is a great angle if they do it that way, because they need to push some of these guys who've never really had a shot, like Ziggler.
What are you talking about? Half their roster is former world champions.
Well,
I'm joking.
Some of the guys, like Ziggler, I really want him to have at least that decent title run, not just a transitional run.
Well, supposedly they're scraping the Money in the Bank pay-per-view itself, and I guess that will be the way they make up for it. But you alluded to the Rumble, and let's move on to that, Will Brooks. The opener, yes, the opening match, it happens, is the World Heavyweight Champion Daniel Bryan retaining in a three-way cage match over two monsters, Mark Henry and The Big Show. Mark Henry severely fucked up and gutting through it this week, tweaked his knee, already had a groin injury. Big Show, I think, actually looks pretty cool, just at least physically, like his new look. And Daniel Bryan retains the title after being dropped out of the cage by Big Show. How was the opener?
Actually, I didn't think the opener was that bad, and I think they did a great job of furthering the storyline that Daniel Bryan's playing this chicken shit heel role, which I'm loving because he's playing it so well that it's very funny because he keeps escaping barely, right? And he just goes celebrates the shit out of it. It's hilarious to watch. I love it. The only thing that's missing, he needs a big ass bodyguard like Shawn Michaels brought in Diesel. Yeah, that's what he could use right now. Other than that, I think it's great.
Cena and Kane in the feud that no one seems to be truly enjoying, kind of a car wreck factor, went to a no contest, setting up the rematch on pay-per-view in an ambulance match. When I read that today, I was like, really? How was this no contest brawl?
The match was okay, but the ending was really cool when he two-stoned Ryder and then beat up Cena. I thought it was cool. I mean, I think the feud's fine. I don't know what everybody's bitching about. I think the feud's fine. There's a cool plot to it. I like it. And it made Zack Ryder seem very important.
WWE Champion CM Punk retained over Dolph Ziggler with a GTS. Some people were complaining that Ziggler looked bad because he lost this match many times, unofficially, of course. How do you think it turned out?
Not really saying much, but I thought it was the best match on the card. I think Ziggler and Punk had a great match. Laurinaitis did enough, but not too much, to take the spotlight off the match, which is good because I was afraid he was going to do that. But yeah, people say, "Oh, Ziggler looked bad." No, they're trying to make Punk look good. They want to make they want Punk to be the next guy. They got to make him look good. And Ziggler, I mean, the stuff that Ziggler got pinned and submitted 2-3 times, maybe. But we've been seeing guys get happen to it a lot. Oh well, shit happens. He'll come back because he's good enough. He'll be a champion soon enough.
We didn't get the expected Funkasaurus dancing spot in the middle of the Rumble, but we also didn't get Jericho winning, which was expected. What we did get out of nowhere was Karma's return. Haven't seen her since, but there was the spots with the announcers, all three of them coming in, Ricardo in his car, Kofi in his hands. So how was the Rumble match itself? It seemed like some people enjoyed it, and some people thought there was a little too much silliness, with the legends and the announcers and shit and whatever.
I thought it was far and away better than last year's Rumble match, where they had the Hornswoggle was in for 10 minutes. Now this year's match I thought was a lot better. With the Ricardo coming out with that piece of shit car, and they actually at one point scratches something off of it. I thought that was the funniest shit ever. And Santino and Mick Foley going sock for sock was hilarious. I was really enjoying that. And the handstand was much better than John Morrison's spot last year.
I don't agree with that.
What? Dude,
I don't.
The spot Morrison did last year, I'm pretty sure I think I could do. There's no freaking way I could do a handstand like Kofi did.
Obviously impressive and athletic and great, whatever. I just thought that Morrison's was a little cooler.
I disagree. That's cool. They're both good spots. So you can't really go wrong. With Jericho coming down, Jericho and Sheamus, I thought the ending of the match was phenomenal. I was really on the edge of my seat the entire time because I was hoping Jericho would win, but in the back of me and my friend's mind, we both thought Sheamus had a good shot of winning this year. And then when it came down to two of them, we're like, oh shit, ooh, we were really into it. And Sheamus winning was not a disappointment one iota. I thought him and Jericho put on a great ending. And Sheamus winning didn't disappoint me at all. And you got to remember, I was the biggest Sheamus hater for a long time, but he's grown on me. Because I think he's gotten a lot better over the past year and a half since when I started hating him.
Well, so, I love his nickname Great White because I just find unintentionally racist things funny.
I agree with you. And Sheamus winning was not a disappointment once that on that order. I thought it was good. And the fact that everybody was pissed off that Funkasaurus was in the match. I don't think this disappoints me at all because if he was in the match and he didn't eliminate like 8 dudes, he would have been like looked upon as disappointing because he's this big guy. But they don't want to do that with him yet. They want to kind of bring him along slowly, which I'm all for. But the one thing I do have to say about the Rumble, though, we haven't seen Carmen since. I think Carmen, like, tweaked. If you watch when she fell, it looked like she tweaked her knee on the way down. I think that's why we haven't seen her since. It looked like she fell awkwardly on that knee. Watch it again. You'll see what I'm talking about. She didn't look like she, like, landed correctly.
Well, I mentioned before I had something to say about Sheamus winning, and even though I think it would have made more sense for Jericho to win, because look, we all know Jericho Punk WrestleMania title match anyway. It would have made it easy to set up instead of Jericho just attacks him and they make up a story afterwards. Well, and Jericho hadn't won it before. The fact is he's still an old name, so on one hand, even if it would have made a lot of sense, a new guy did win it for a change, so that's cool. But let's see how they follow up with it, because it doesn't mean that he's going to go last. He shouldn't, frankly, but that doesn't mean he can't go as close to Rockin' Cena as possible. So we'll see where they actually place him. It's not like it used to be. You win the Royal Rumble, you main event WrestleMania. Not the case anymore. Not just because of multiple world titles, but because of other factors like The Rock's match and shit. So if they go all the way with it and they take the dark match from last year and put it in the title match on pay-per-view, cool. Let's just see the follow-up, because that's been WWE's problem. They usually set the ball in motion and then knock it down long before it can really gain some steam. So we'll see how the follow-up goes. Let's go to some calls. Jamal in California.
Having Sheamus win the Royal Rumble, I say it's a great idea because throughout 2011, WWE, they were really good at building up a lot of good heels, but hardly any faces. So having Sheamus win, who around 2011, in my opinion, was very over as a face, having him win, great idea. But I agree with you, Eric. I am really hoping that the WWE follow through with this for WrestleMania, because, well, last year I thought WrestleMania will turn out great, and little did I know they'll actually take an 8-man tag match and have it last 2 minutes. Horrible.
I think that was the least of the things they did last year. WrestleMania really sucked last year.
As long as things like make sense, I really don't care. I'll follow the show, see where they take me. Doesn't mean I always agree with them. It just means like, all right, let me see where they're taking this. Let's give it a shot. Just because the program is starting to win me back. Like, I was such a jaded fan for a while. Now they're starting to win me back slowly because I'm liking what they're doing right now.
They usually do that around WrestleMania time.
Yeah. All right. So hopefully it all ends well. Like, I like what they're doing with Kane, Cena, and Ryder. I like what they're doing with CM Punk and Jericho. I like the Funkasaurus. I mean, Sheamus winning the Royal Rumble was kind of cool. I mean, I'm liking mostly, and I like what they're doing with Daniel Bryan. Most of the storylines I'm actually enjoying right now. Hopefully they all end well, makes their programming that much better.
Royce in Pomona, California, you're on the roundtable.
First of all, I kind of want to go back to a little bit to the Screwjob thing.
Screw that. Let's move on. No, what do you have to say?
I don't technically believe it was work, but I wouldn't be surprised if it somehow came out that it was worked. Because remember, this is an industry or a business or whatever that has covered up murders and potential molestation trials with various people. Can't really say this is out of the cards for like this kind of industry. Which, come on, Eric, it was 30 years of making people believe it was real. Are you going to tell me this is out of the realm of possibility?
And outside of 8-year-olds, people caught on pretty quick that it wasn't real back in like the 30s.
Yeah, I don't know. But I do kind of want to talk about Rumble, too. I was glad that Jericho lost because his, like, shtick wore thin day one with me. So I'm like, okay, whatever. So I was glad. Plus, he's a Smart Mark favorite and he lost, so that doubles up the treat for me. And I really do hope Sheamus goes and wins at WrestleMania because Danielson. The one thing about him possibly
Danielson and Sheamus would be like the whitest titled match ever. Like, people would have to wear glasses to watch it.
Yeah. The one thing that kind of disturbs me is like, yeah, I do kind of want the Rumble winner to be somewhere on top of the card, but that would mean Danielson would be on top of the card as well. And that really doesn't feel right with me, man. It's like, ugh. I know it's just me smart raging, but it's like, come on, man. Now I know how people felt with Cena back in '07. This is a travesty. There's guys in that roster. Like Kofi, come on now.
Corey, any Ring of Honor that you've checked out?
Yes, I just watched the most recent episode just the other day, and
you're making Cornette's blood curdle. Event. It's an event. It's not a show. It's not an episode. That's fake shit. It's an event.
Episode? On Ring of Honor this past week, they had a fabulous piece about Grizzly Redwood. I had no idea that he went through so many medical problems as a child.
That's because you don't watch fucking Pro Wrestling Respect videos. Thanks, Corey.
I told you I was saving up.
It's been, 2 years? And that video is actually on the Pro Wrestling Respect YouTube if you look under the profile videos. So we actually did that first.
Yes, you did. But
in fact, I would say that the reason that they covered that the way they did is because of what we did. Because I know it got a lot of great internal reviews, let's say, the piece I did on Grizzly Redwood. So I think it was not unrelated.
Well, anyway, I think it was a fantastic look into Grizzly Redwood's background. I had no idea that we almost never had him ever. I did not know that he almost died as a child. So this was a very fascinating piece, very tastefully edited. T.J. Perkins had this great match with Tommaso Ciampa. I just think that T.J. Perkins is getting better the longer he stays in Ring of Honor. This was a really fast-paced match.
Wait, T.J. Perkins is getting better the longer he stays in Ring of Honor?
Yeah, it's like the first week he was good, and he's getting better from there.
I'd hope so, because he's been wrestling, 10-plus years?
I know, but this was a really fun match to watch.
In other words, they're giving him more time to do stuff.
Yes, but I think that's a good move. Another match that they had was Grizzly Redwood versus Michael Elgin, and although Grizz was bounced around quite a bit by Elgin, this was still a very good, very fast-paced match, and I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the year Elgin would be the new Ring of Honor champion because he's really fantastic.
Moving on from Ring of Honor, Corey, wanted to touch on TNA because last time we did our show, I said how irrelevant TNA is right now. Apparently, that's just domestically. Before I get to their international shows, what I mean is, you look at what WWE does, and I know they emphasize Twitter to an obnoxious level and everything, but forget even Twitter. Just what people talk about. They put a fat guy dancing on TV, and it becomes what everyone talks about for a week. WWE just seems to get people talking more, and TNA really has nothing going on that for people to talk about, even negative shit, like drug problems with the Hardys or whatever the fuck. It just seems like they're completely off the radar to a degree. Now, that's not to say they don't have their audience. They got their million or less or whatever that watch every week. But it just seems like wrestling in general has their audiences, and that's it. The same people watch WWE every week, the same people watch TNA every week, and the same people watch ROH on the internet or whatever the fuck. So it just seems like kind of stagnant in a way. However, TNA is definitely not irrelevant internationally. They did 2 shows recently. Well, they taped several shows in India, which is Ring Ka King, but they also had their UK Invasion Impact Wrestling this past week. But before we get to the UK one, Ring Ka King is interesting. Firstly, I got a lot of goofy shit to say about it, so I'll save that for the last part. But the serious stuff, I checked out their first show because I was interested, especially because a couple of years ago, the word was that WWE wanted to start making brands in different countries. Well, that never amounted to anything, and you think with the resources they have, it would have, but TNA beat them to the punch. And frankly, they probably did a better job than WWE might have, because the most WWE ever did along those lines is, maybe if you remember Los Super Astros, where they would tape lucha matches before Raw. That was kind of neat. I liked that show because it was different. And I like different things in wrestling. Like, speaking of international shows, I would love, because these things, I don't know, maybe it's just I'm bored with American wrestling, but these things just intrigue me more. Like when AAA does their Triple Mania show recently, or New Japan does the Wrestle Kingdom pay-per-view in January. I'm more interested in that shit. I don't follow their storylines or anything, just based on the lineup. I just want to see something different, and that's what I like about it. I like the different cultures and the different styles. So TNA started Ring Ka King, and Of course, it's not using the TNA banner, but they start off with this big intro with dancers. I didn't know there were so light-skinned people in India dancing around, but this DJ Punjabi-looking guy, and even in Hindi or whatever language they were speaking that I couldn't understand, there was still way too much talking on this show. And I know it was the intro show, so they wanted to let everyone know who they are and everything, so that's cool. But not only was there a little too much talking and singing, and I liked it at first, but just went on a little too long. As soon as I saw Jeremy Borash, I was like, oh, fuck, come on. No one wants to see him. But they presented 2 matches on their first show, and really, it wasn't anything better than you'd see on some standard indie locally. Nothing too bad, but nothing special either. But maybe that's fine. This Mr. India, I don't remember his name, but he wrestled Nick Dinsmore with a new gimmick, and he carried him through this match. And if you want an idea of what this Mr. India is like, if you haven't seen him, picture like an Indian Mason Ryan, because that's pretty much how he fucking moved. It was like a lug being carried to a match. But at any rate, the main event was Brutus Magnus and Matt Morgan. Morgan is pretty much being pushed as their top babyface. It was all right. Morgan's cool, I guess. But before I throw it to you, Corey, some of my goofy observations of Ring Ka King. Firstly, the new Dr. Nick Dinsmore gimmick, just straight out of fucking Glow. The one thing I did like about it was the catchphrase at the beginning was, "Paging Dr. Nick." That was cute. But the idea of Nick Dinsmore as a doctor writing prescriptions, it writes itself. You fill in the blanks. They're bringing in all these other outside people like Chris Masters, Chavo, whatever. I think they should bring in Funaki, so instead of Indeed, he goes, Hindi. They would also be insane not to include Curryman. Hello? Curryman. But I liked seeing Brutus Magnus on the show because immediately I was like, oh, he's perfect for this. Like, you remember the faction they showed, essentially, where it was like backstage him and Scott Steiner were on the phone with, I assume, is supposed to be Jared or Dixie or whoever back home?
Mm-hmm.
They should call that group the Colony.
Oh.
And just have Brutus Magnus beat up like this. Get Ben Kingsley to come back and play Gandhi, and he could beat the shit out of him. Like, as soon as I saw Brutus Magnus in the British flag and Union Jacks all over the screen, I was like, oh my God. Top heel. So what'd you think of Ring Ka King? I know you've seen some of the other shows besides the first that I haven't yet.
So far, it seems a little bit more upscale than your standard TNA Impact show. I do wish that they would cut down on the talking segments, especially since I don't speak whatever language these other wrestlers are speaking. The first impression I got with a lot of the talking segments, I started thinking about when William Regal used to tag team with Tajiri. Tajiri speaking Japanese and had Regal speaking English.
It's not Tajiri, in case you noticed. It's Tajiri.
I keep messing up. But they would speak different languages, and yet they understood each other. That's how a lot of the segments felt, where you would have one wrestler speaking Hindi, another speaking English, and they're carrying on a conversation like it's the same language. Thought that was odd. I do really like the set. I think that is definitely a wonderful set, and the production value seemed okay, but they really need to cut back on these talking segments. I actually did count. It was 23 minutes on the first episode before we got our first match with Nick Dinsmore. I did see the second episode, and I'm sorry to say that this trend does continue. The first 20 minutes is just nothing but talking and reintroducing people we already know. I suppose this is because Ring Ka King is for the Indian market, and maybe in India they're not as familiar with Chavo, but I just don't think we need a reintroduction every episode. So I hope this stops at least by episode 4. There's 3 episodes up right now.
Well, I like it because it's different, and not even just because of the culture and the setting, but just the tone. You don't get as much as the usual bullshit. Now, granted, the end of the first show where they were setting up the faces and the heels and everyone makes the save for fucking Matt Morgan after he's getting beat down, I think that was kind of goofy to do on your first show, because here's the thing with me. Even though I know who those people are, like Scott Steiner, and I'm so happy Steiner's here, but this is for a new audience, and this is essentially a new promotion. I just don't feel like they should have done that in the sense that, okay, typical cliche wrestling angle, baby faces make the save, and it's the face-off in the ring. Well, I don't even know who these people are yet, or I know who this promotion is yet, so why would I care? You know what I mean? Like, make them care first. You don't have to go so heavy with the cliche wrestling storyline just yet. But one other thing is, it's a real damn shame for them they couldn't get Great Khali, and I'm not being sarcastic about that at all. I really mean that because, yeah, he's a lug who can't move. He's like a giant log. That's not the point. Point is, he's a name. He's huge in fucking India. Well, of course, he's huge everywhere. But I mean, he's a big name in India. And this would have been perfect to include him in that. And with his WWE deal, like, kind of up in the air recently, you know they were just like, just re-sign him so TNA can't use him. That has to be all it was. Because really, do they have much of a use for Khali? Put him in the fucking Rumble and squash Cody Rhodes the next day or whatever the fuck it was. So it just sucks for them they couldn't nail that big name. But anyway, another big name they do have, though, is Hulk Hogan. And he came back to England for the first time in over a decade, which was aired this past Thursday on Impact UK Invasion. And as much as Rodney's complained on the show about they need to get out of the Impact Zone, it looks so small in Bush League and blah, blah, blah. Well, this looked great. Like 10,000 people in the Wembley Arena or whatever it was. It looked awesome. I mean, it kind of did look like 2000-era WCW when they were touring like Europe or Australia or whatever when they weren't doing very well here. It had that kind of vibe to it. It really definitely helped TNA look better, especially in HD.
I thought the UK show was one of their better ones. I thought it was better than the recent pay-per-views they've been having. I noticed that when TNA does shows overseas, they put a little more effort into this as opposed to their American shows. And I'd like to get your opinion on that, Eric. Why is it that when you get house show results or TV show results for WWE and TNA from other countries, it's so much better than what you would see in one of their U.S. pay-per-views? Why is that?
Well, I don't know what you mean as far as WWE. I think WWE does the exact same style show everywhere they go. As far as TNA, well, we know they have a very different format, and WWE to an extent, but more so TNA than they do for TV when they do house shows. And especially with TNA, what people will always discount, like the fucking stupid Wrestling Observer, there was a poll where they were like, what's the promotion in the most trouble according to you? Like, which promotion is in trouble the most? And, like, TNA was second place. Second place, motherfucker, if you read the news at WrestlingRoundtable.com, you'll see that they've got, like, international deals all over the world. They've got 1 million people watching on Spike TV every week. Maybe they're not doing great pay-per-view buys at all in the shitter. They're not doing great maybe attendance-wise most of the time domestically. But just look at the big fucking picture, people. They're on all over the world, and that's why when they do go to these places, outside of like a few places they've had to cancel, like Germany or Israel or whatever the fuck, they do draw pretty well. Like Hogan hasn't been there forever. How many other chances are these fans going to have to see Sting? Or I want to see Bobby Roode and the TNA guys. It's not like they're 1PW, or 1PW doesn't exist anymore, I don't think, but like any local shit. So it's a different thing for them. It's not like they see it every week. And even if they do, it's not the same as being on in the same country. It's just different.
Well, I thought that this TNA UK show was quite enjoyable. I specifically liked Austin Aries' match with Mark Haskins. Outside of the fact that Mark ends the match by missing the shooting star press by a good mile and landing on his face, I felt that he put in good effort, and this was a very fun and fast-paced match. And again, it seems like they were putting in more effort into this show overall. I do notice that TNA has been trying to improve here and there. I'm actually liking a lot of Sting segments.
The one thing I don't like, speaking of Sting, and then we're going to have to get going, but the thing that still sucks about TNA is the commentary. And I know Ring of Honor fans think I'm the worst fucking thing that ever happened. Fuck you. But I cannot listen to Mike Tenay. And I want to like Mike Tenay. I thought he was a good third man in WCW, not the leading man, because during the Bully Ray James Storm main event, Sting comes out. He's got a cricket bat. I don't know if it was wrapped in like black electric tape or whatever the fuck, but he's got a cricket bat because they're in England. So I go in my head, oh, that's cute. Nice little touch. And then Mr. Exposition, Mr. Plot-Driven Dialogue, Mr. We have to tell you exactly how to feel because you're retarded, goes, Sting has a cricket bat instead of his normal baseball bat. Oh, my fucking God. Are you kidding me? We're not blind. Ugh.
That was a very unnecessary statement out of TNA. I think the fans at home could see what was going on.
Well, I hope so. Anyway, I hope you see what's going on, because if you read the news at WrestlingRoundtable.com, like I said, you will know. So keep updated on WrestlingRoundtable.com. Don't just stay here in the chat room. Don't just stay here on Blog Talk Radio or YouTube after the fact. We've got a whole network going on. Facebook, Twitter, the message board. We've got our archives on iTunes, Go-Fi Live, and Blog Talk Radio. And when we come back in a few weeks, we're going to talk about WWE's Elimination Chamber pay-per-view and all the latest goings-on in pro wrestling and mixed martial arts. Not just the latest goings-on, but past, present, and history, too. We can talk about whatever you want. So join us on WrestlingRoundtable.com and everywhere else in the Wrestling Roundtable community. So for the panel of Will Brooks, Amira Rahim, Rodney LeConte, Coriander Ake, thank you to all the callers. I'm the host, Eric Santamaria. Join us on WrestlingRoundtable.com.